Thank you and welcome everyone to the Instructional Policy and Student Achievement Committee of the board tonight. We have Kenya Harrington with us tonight because a good portion of this meeting is going to be dedicated to the standing topic that we added to the agenda to look at our school designations that we receive from the state. And get a sense kind of category by category that will kind of take a deeper dive as we go through every single instructional policy meeting. We'll try to always have some time to take a little deeper dive into some strategies in the buildings that we're using. So that's the main thing on the agenda tonight. And we have our, I'll just mention quickly our important named partner update that's on the agenda, and we'll get to that in a minute because we have a good news item to share there as well. But if it's okay with our board members, I would love to just dive right in while Kenya's here and just kick off with him, if that's okay with everyone.
That's fine with me.
Yep, sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, just to tee this up, we'll cover the kind of overarching, and we have a 2-page handout that is attached in the board docs that is a summary. And then we'll use the PowerPoint to dive in just on the priority school designation. We'll spend some time tonight making sure we're clear on how schools become the priority status. But the 2-page handout gives the big picture, and Kenya will start with that just to make sure we understand kind of all the different designations and where we are in the middle of a pandemic too, that they've suspended a lot of the designations or furthering down the road in designations. And so we can talk about that as well tonight. So Kenya, I'll go ahead and cast the 2-page handout to start with.
Okay, thank you.
Let me know when you want to switch around.
Okay. Well, as Dr. McWilliams, good afternoon first off to everyone. Hopefully everyone had a nice day. As Dr. McWilliams-Woods starts to share the 2-page handout, just to remind individuals, within Ohio, we use the accountability measures as a state to look at things on our report card to kind of gauge where we are with regards to continuous improvement for schools and districts. And then that's also in alignment with federal requirements through ESSA to determine buildings who are performing low and them being identified as priority. They're also known as comprehensive support and improvement schools, or CSIs. You won't hear us use that terminology too often. We kind of stick with the priority because it's simplistic in nature in how we explain things to our buildings and our partners. And that usually includes, at a minimum, the lowest performing 5% of schools. And we'll kind of go through those different things. So if we look at the 2-page, if you could look at the area identified as identification criteria, and if you look at the second box where it says 4-year graduation rate of 67% or lower, then it says, or lowest performing schools using the report card's overall grade, or failure to improve subgroup performance over the 3-year identification period. Those are the 3 criteria to fall into priority status. A building would have to have at least one of those to be identified as a priority building. This was all identified through ESSA with the release of the 2018 school report cards. So as we know, we look at the report card in a year lag. So that was all of the data from 2017-18 that was reported on the 18 school year report card. So those are the 3 criteria that would put a building in that status. Dr. McWilliams-Woods, could you go up where we could see the buildings so I could just share? If you just scroll, yeah, perfect, thank you. Yep. So if you look at the I'll say the color is pink. Hopefully it is pink on everybody's screen. I'm not sure, but it looks pink on mine. But our buildings that are priority focus, priority status, excuse me, Ennis, CLC, because they fell in the lowest 5%. Then we also had Helen Arnold, who fell in the lowest 5%. And then for graduation rate, we had Akron Alternative Academy, or AAA. And then we also had Buchtel, East, Kenmore Garfield, and North High School. So those were our priority schools once this information was released back in 2018. As Ellen said, based on the pandemic and COVID-19, there was guidance that was shared with districts that they were going to put a hold on designations. So whatever you were identified with at this time, you would remain as such because of how they were looking at testing and how different things were changed because of the pandemic. So I wanted to start out there and kind of explain that. When we go into more specifics about the different criteria, when we look at the graduation rate, I'm now looking at the PowerPoint, so you won't see this different information. But I wanted to make sure that everybody understood what was calculated was the 4-year adjusted cohort graduation rate, and that was defined by the U.S. Department of Education, and it was applied for all schools. And they look at the number of graduates being in the numerator, and then it's divided by the total number of students in that graduating cohort, which would be the denominator. So you would get a federal graduation rate and a state graduation rate. And this is where a lot of confusion came in back in 2018, because when we got our state graduation report card grades, most of our buildings, all of our buildings did not fall below 67%. So as the information was coming and we were looking at a number that deviated from that 67%, we weren't clear on why we were priority status. So then what came out from the Ohio Department of Education through the federal government was the understanding that if a student didn't meet graduation requirements without exemptions or through what we would call traditional pathway, that means if you're a special ed student and there's exemptions because of your IEP or some other way, alternative assessment, those students were factored out. In being completely honest with you, as educators, we did not feel that was appropriate because it almost felt like a student was being penalized because of their disability or some other form of assistance that they got based off a need that was identified either medically or through academic support. But regardless to say, the federal government said those individuals could not be factored in. So as you take those students out, that's where a graduation percentage dropped off and our buildings hit the 67% or lower. Once again, that was something that was concerning to us. We raised questions with the State Department of Education and then also the federal government, but that was something that was not changed. And then also we have found out, and I don't know exactly when this will take effect, but that is going to be the norm moving forward as they identify state graduation rates as well. So that's something to keep in mind, because as I said, when we factor in all of our students and we don't penalize them for any disabilities or exemptions, our graduation rates were way above 67%. But when we have to factor those students out, there is a drop off, and that is concerning if that's something that happens and becomes a state guideline as well. So that's the graduation rate aspect. I want to pause there and see if there's any questions before I move on to the next section.
Yes, it's just a clarification. So you're saying it's at the federal level where they have to remove that particular cohort?
Yes, ma'am.
Graduation rate.
Yes, ma'am.
And forthcoming, that'll also be the state graduations requirement too in the upcoming?
Yes, ma'am. I'm not sure of when they're going to enact that, but that has been discussed, and from what's been shared with to us, that is what's going to be the state guidance as well.
Yeah, and if you think about a real example then, and me being the former director of special education, the level of importance and kind of pain that this gave me was, so if you are a district or a school who also serves more students with more significant disabilities. So the difference between the state and federal graduation, the state graduation rate in Ohio as it stands, which is what shows on the report card that you're all familiar with seeing, that includes any and all students who meet Ohio's graduation rate requirements. And that includes students who, meet graduation through passing all the state tests. That means students who also pass it through some of the career ed work keys options that you can get industry credentials and, those pathways. And it also includes students with severe disabilities. Now, this is students with severe disabilities. If you think of many of the students who are nonverbal, who are basically their IEP goals might be just some basic life skills. It might be skills that are more physical therapy oriented, just to be able to move their arm to hit a joystick on their wheelchair. That's the IEP goals. Obviously, the students aren't taking regular state tests. They're taking the alternate assessment, which is based on their own skill level and their own growth on those identified areas where they are. However, whatever skill level they are, it's what kind of growth you're making on that skill level. That's the group of students who are taking an alternate assessment that the state does count, but the U.S. Department of Ed says, no, you can't count those kids who are taking the alternate assessment. You can't count them as a graduate, and you take them out of the total formula of how many students graduated. They stay in the denominator, so you're still having to count them as a student, but you take them out and you're not allowed to count them as a graduate. I think it's horrendous. I was so angry when this came down because it feels discriminatory to me about the kids, and that is not considered a graduation in the eyes of the U.S. Department of Education. Then the other flip side is, if you are a school or a district that has more students with severe disabilities, you're also going to have more students than not counted as a graduate. You see how those go together? And I think that's also, in urban centers, we have historically a higher percentage of students who live in the district because families stay where the medical services and the physical therapies and things like that are housed. And there's birth rate issues, and prenatal health issues that can also have a higher incidence of students with severe disabilities. So it's a complicated, frustrating piece, but the U.S. Department of Ed is wanting all states across the United States to go with this common graduation rate, where everyone, instead of having states having different criteria, that the students with severe disabilities will not be included in the graduation rate. And that's why we dropped below 67% back in 2018. Now, we have done more and more and more over the years to try to take advantage of some of the other alternative ways of our own Ohio graduation rate to make sure that we get more students counted. Because we can go through some of the alternative ways of graduation that the state has put in. We can use some of those, especially the last couple of years that they've added some additional flexibility for some, like the career-oriented pathways. We've tried to channel more students with severe disabilities in those versus the alternate assessment, just to avoid them not being counted as a graduate. Okay, I'll pause. Because I'm sharing my screen, maybe Miss Autry, if you could check the chat, if anybody is raising their hand or a chat, I can't see it right now. So if you wouldn't mind just helping to facilitate to have someone call out, or if someone wants to ask a question.
I think Ms. Mansfield had her hand up.
Yes,
I
she
did. I was, Ellen clarified everything that I was going to say. I just needed to listen to her for a few more minutes. And I was going to make some of those same points, that we have a higher number of those students based on just where we live, and that hospitals are here. I mean, it's just such an unfair system. I mean, if you're going to take them out of one number, how do you not take them out of another? And the other thing that's very frustrating is I know, I understand trying to get everyone to where they can be their best, right? Where they can be the best person, the best graduate, the best citizen they can be. But I also went to North, where we had a lot of students with severe disabilities who were in the building, and they were doing their best, and they had people who worked with them all the time, but they were not going to be able to sit there and fill out a bubble test. I mean, it was just
Right.
not possible. So it just frustrated. So you clarified everything, Ellen. Thank you.
Yeah, I do believe, and as Mr. Harrington said, we do have, we have done a lot of work of trying to use those other pathways for our students with severe disabilities. Now, unfortunately, when the pandemic hit, it suspended that, it's every 3 years they recalculate. Mr. Harrington, I'm saying that correct, right? Every
Yes,
3 years.
Yep.
So they recalculate who falls in the eligibility for the priority status. And so we believe that we would have been moving our high schools that are in the priority status because of this new way they're calculating the graduation rate. But then the pandemic hit and it suspended everything. So nobody was getting out of priority status. Everybody just stayed kind of status quo where you were last year and this year. They continued it just because of the pandemic. And there's no new, test scores and things like that they can look at for the other reason why you become priority, which is that low performance. I'm going to go ahead and put back up the schools so you can kind of look again in terms of the high schools. The only reason why the high schools are in is because of this new calculation of the graduation rate. And then Innis and Helen Arnold are in because of that other criteria, the lowest performing school using the report card's overall grade. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Harrington.
No, I was just going to say, in that one, we kind of categorized it or identified it as that, but really that's the lowest 5% of remaining schools, or the lowest 5% performing are identified. So that's how those two buildings fell in that category as well.
Do you want to talk about how you get out once they turn on the exit criteria again so that we can get out? Do you want to talk about what that criteria is?
Yeah, so essentially to exit priority status, a school falling in the lowest 5%, they just have to perform higher than that. And it's determined by the overall report card for 2 consecutive years. So once I'll use this for lack of better terms, once the clock starts running or ticking again, if they can have 2 consecutive years of performing higher than the lowest 5% of schools, they could exit. And then for the high schools with that 67% or lower, it would be just having a rating of higher than 67% for 2 consecutive years also. And then we didn't talk about failure to improve subgroup performance over the 3-year identification period. We didn't have any buildings falling in that category for priority status. But if that was the case, they would have to have no students performing lower than the 5% of schools in a particular subgroup. And our subgroups, of course, African American, EL, L, and those different ones that are categorized that way. But we didn't have any students falling into priority status by that. But those are the exit criteria for priority status.
So any questions about the exit criteria, how to get out once they turn that back on? And if you think also about, we'll have a graduation rate with some of the adjustments that the state legislature has done during this pandemic time, some of the flexibility they've provided. We won't have the traditional state tests from last year. So we have a year gap there, which is really needed for the 2 consecutive years, unless they decide to just kind of skip last year and go to the 18-19 school year and then skip 19-20. And then if they decide to use this year's data, once they turn it back on, or they may not use anything from last year. They can't use anything from last year because none of the state tests got completed. But if they decide to use this year's data, which obviously is complicated, right? Because we have, number of virtual remote families who are not just here, but across the state, who don't want their kids to come in and be in a testing environment with lots of other kids. We've certainly had some come in, but not the extent that I'm sure the state would like to see with state testing across the state. Are they going to use this year's data, and is this the first of the 2 years, or are they going to not use this year at all? They've already said that no one can continue further into school improvement. So no one's going to fall into the priority status, but this exit criteria, are they going to use this year, or is it going to be next year and the year after? Which means, do we stay in priority status for another 2 years, where now it just keeps extending the status? Do you see what I mean? Like it's nice that we're not able to go further into school improvement, or other schools or districts aren't able to. But at the same token, that also means you're staying in longer than we normally would because of this, that we're also not counting the exit criteria to be able to get out. I hope that makes sense, that you can see how it's just going to extend our status.
So since this all started then, so what is the longest that any of our particular schools have been in any of these designations? And have any of them ever moved out?
Well, so it seems old now, but in 2018, this was new. So we've been in it since 2018. And because of the pandemic, like Ellen said, we're not sure how long we're going to have to stay with the designations. But since 2018, once the buildings were identified, we understood what we needed to do to try and help them exit. But because of the things that happened, that kind of was put on hold.
Yeah, we didn't have, prior to 2018, right, that 3-year time period before that, we didn't have any priority schools. Yeah. So then we had this new group go in 2018. But we could, probably would be good, Mrs. Autry, just even some of our discussions with the Bookdale New Tech master planning that's happening right now, we could go back, all the way 15 years ago or so, I think is probably, or 13 years ago, when this particular designation status came in. They've tweaked some of the naming, they've tweaked the eligibility. That's why anytime you get into state report card and criteria, it changes. So sometimes it's hard to look multi-year, but we could at least put together a chart that shows sort of that history of the schools and the status since the term priority status came in. Prior to that, we had, and David may have to help me remember all the terms, but it was like academic emergency and academic watch, and there was another category prior to that. But we could try to put together that history.
Yeah, that would be helpful for me because I do remember hearing those specific terms as early as 2011, 12, the academic watch emergency. Then I knew at some point in time it flipped to some new terminology. So that's where it starts to get really confusing.
Yeah, 2018 is when it switched to priority focus and warning status. But like Dr. McWilliams-Woods was saying, prior to that, you had emergency, academic watch, you had the distress commission. So some of those things changed, but yeah, we can get you that past history as well.
Yeah, it would be, it's a whole nother, my famous presentations where you are comparing the apples, the oranges, and the bananas, it actually would be interesting for us to put it long term to show how it's changed and where the schools have landed over time, as the status and the names, because when the names change, the criteria changed a bit too, because every time the report card changes, then these end up having to change as well. That's why it goes hand in hand.
I believe Mrs. McKintrick has her hand up.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. And didn't we learn at our last board meeting that the letter grades are going to change again? That they're going to have different terminology. They're not going to use the letter grades anymore. So how does that impact everything then?
Yeah, there's two things. So this school year, they did pass legislation that there is not going to be letter grades show up on the report card. There will be results, just like last year, for whatever we were able to accomplish during this pandemic. So last year we did have a fall third grade OST. And we had attendance and things like that and a graduation rate. They will show that on the report card, but there won't be letter grades attached to it. So they decided to do the same thing this year. So any tests we did give, they'll show what percentage passed the test, but they're not going to then combine it into some kind of letter grade. There is proposed legislation that our legislators were explaining at our last board meeting to permanently make that change. I'm not sure the prospect of that passing that would permanently get rid of the letter grades and change it to just kind of categories of performance. And that's what the legislators were talking about, but that hasn't passed yet. That's just in the education committee discussion phase.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. I can actually, it might, while we're talking about this, it might be good to just pull up if we look at, I'll pull up Bookville here because, so this is the report card, and you see how there's normally letter grades here. So this is from last year, and there's no letter grades. But if you click in, since we're talking about graduation rate, the graduation rate is still listed, although there's no letter grade, total up here. And this is exactly what it's going to look like next year, or when they come out in September, demonstrating the performance, any kind of test that we give for this year. And so this is Bookville's graduation rate. So this is the state graduation rate, 4 years where all kids are counted and included, including our kids with severe disabilities. But then the federal takes out the students with severe disabilities, and that's what dropped the graduation rate below that 67% back in 2007. It would have been the 2017-18 graduation rate. that's kind of the madness of the differences. I mean, when you look at this graduation rate compared to how you end up in priority status. But Bookdale does have students with disabilities, and they also have some medically fragile, students with severe disabilities there as well. Okay. Any other questions about, or Mr. Harrington, was there anything else? Do you want to talk about for priority status, what's required?
Yeah, so if you scroll down. So once again, we talk about the identification, but if you go down some more, the district improvement components, and then also the school improvement components of priority status. And we tried to create a chart where you could follow along with the numbers. But essentially for district improvement components, buildings have to address priorities to strengthen the core academic program, high quality professional development of instructional staff, address teaching and learning needs related to academic problems of low achieving students, and then promote effective parental involvement. And then AMOs address district improvement for annual measurable objectives, and then really addressing the gaps for each subgroup. And then when we talk about school improvement components, that's how we try and meet that. So I'm sure you've heard of us talk about our 90-day plans in our buildings, or our school improvement plans and what we're doing. And then when we have those conversations about professional development that buildings are trying to bring in with their federal funds or their Title I dollars, it's all around trying to close gaps for subgroups, but then also just close gaps as a whole for their building and improve those annual measurable objectives that would be on the report card. So gap closing, achievement, prepare for success, graduation rate, and the other ones that are outlined. So those are the things that we try and do to meet the district components that are required by the state through our school improvement guidelines. And then just really looking at our 90-day plan, the strategies that we try and implement, and then what are we doing across departments to collaborate to make sure that we're synced and in unison to work and address things that our buildings need that may be different from one cluster to the next. Because as we understand that subgroups are failing, the rationale for the performance may be different for Bookdale versus Ellet. And then there may be some commonalities. So what do we do that's uniform in the district, but what do we do that's specific to those respective buildings as well?
Mr. Harrington, do you also want to talk about the monitoring that the state does? So if you are a priority status, how we get monitored and what they do to make sure that we're meeting all these requirements?
So essentially, as we talked about receiving the federal funds, also through our Comprehensive Continuous Improvement Plan, or CCIP, we have to provide evidence of what we're doing to make sure we're addressing the gaps and the concerns that are outlined in the status or designations. So we're making sure that as buildings are completing their 90-day plans, that information must be uploaded to the state to provide evidence that we're doing what we say we're doing with the federal funds, but then also that we've implemented practices that are research-based, that are addressing the concerns at each building. We also have a state support team representative who kind of monitors and supports us. So working through that individual, we're looking at what kind of professional development opportunities can be provided from outside of our district, because Mrs. Gijic is doing an excellent job within the district to create things through teaching and learning to ensure that we're addressing the concerns. But then how do we reach out to the state to get that support? And then, like I said, as far as the monitoring, we must submit things on a monthly basis. And then also, as we all know, audits come to address the usage of funds in relation to those things as well. Right now in our department, we're starting to have what we call our program design meetings. Through the program design meeting, they're looking at their allocations for next year. But what we also do, we look at the needs assessment So based off of the things that you implemented this year, how much success did you have? And if you were successful, what are the things you're going to do to sustain that? And then if there were difficulties, what needs to be done differently? And then also, how do we in school improvement support you through those changes as well?
So what we thought we could do in subsequent meetings, once we'll talk about that priority status this time, and then we'll talk about the focus and there's two other categories, the watch and the warning categories, that are somewhat similar that we can talk about. And then we could start to actually take a deep dive, like pick a school. You could tell us which priority school you want to take a look at, and we could share the 90-day plan with you so that you could get a sense of the intensive planning and data analysis, planning around exactly what the needs are, and then how the accountability structures are built in, both internally. We have monthly meetings out in every single building. The buildings that have that are priority status or focus status, the school improvement teams meet twice a month instead of once a month. We have the state support team person who's assigned by the state, who attends a lot of our PACE meetings, our monthly meetings out in the building where we're monitoring the implementation. But I think it would be good for you to see what are these buildings that are priority status, what have they written into their plan to address and get out of priority status. At Bookville, there's obviously, a lot of new tech strategies, because that's a part of their implementation of getting higher quality instruction. And but then they specifically have to address, obviously, their students with disabilities and different pathways to make sure that graduation rate is adjusted. Since they're not in for the academic piece, the state will be focused on looking at their, what are they doing to boost their graduation rate so that there's not as many students with disabilities in that alternate assessment. And then overall, how are you boosting your graduation rate? The Bookville, as an example, has such a high graduation rate, but they still continue to tweak that. They still continue to bring in programs like AVID and working with Project Grad to keep boosting it. But they also have to make sure that the students with disabilities get moved into those different pathways as well, so that they don't get dinged when they're using that U.S. Department of Ed graduation rate. But then for us as a district, we also require all of the academic improvement, even though they're not as a priority status because of improvement, their academic achievement, we still require that as a district, that they're constantly improving their student achievement data, and that they're tracking that and looking where there's gaps. And that's what Mr. Harrington's office is responsible for, all of those improvement strategies and monitoring that and making sure they're accomplishing what they've committed and said they're going to accomplish. But I think it'd be good for us to take a deep dive and pick one or two example buildings and take a look at what they're doing.
I would agree. And I had a comment. So I'm thinking about this status is due to our groups who are exempt for various reasons, which makes me think of the SPED teacher. So this puts a lot of extra on them, I'm imagining. Like, are they required to be part of the SIP teams? Since,
Yes.
IEP students are the ones that are, disproportionately, removed from the equation.
Yeah. And I do think it's really, really important, though. And yes, they are. Mr. Harrington requires it to answer that question. But it's really, really important to distinguish between the only students that are taken out of the graduation rate that dropped it below 67% are the students who qualified for the alternate assessment, which are only students with severe multiple disabilities. So it's not your typical student who has a learning disability or a cognitive disability. that are the vast majority of the students in our schools. All of those students are taking regular assessments, and they're following the regular graduation rate. It's only the students who have severe disabilities that are in this alternate assessment group. I want to make sure you understand that.
Yes.
That distinction.
Thanks for that clarification.
Mm-hmm. So it would be the students who are more, or the intervention specialists who serve the students with multiple disabilities there, and making sure. But since 2018, since we got tripped up with this new definition of, or calculation for graduation rate, we've already made adjustments since 2018 to get more of those students with multiple disabilities into typical graduation pathways using the flexibility now provided by the state. And we could, if you would like, we could have Mrs. Brady come and talk about what they've done and give some examples of how they've moved kids into more of the career-oriented graduation pathways. Yeah. But having those seats at the table to keep the school improvement plans working, and at the same time, any typical student, that one more typical student we get to graduate also helps the federal graduation rate, right? So it's not only the students who have multiple disabilities, but because any other student you graduate helps get you above 67% too. So in that way, Mrs. Autry, exactly what you're saying, it's, no matter what, everybody has to keep focusing on moving the graduation rate higher and not put it all on the shoulders of the students with severe disabilities. Other questions about, kind of the process? Do you like kind of chunking it category at a time like this, so that we don't get lost into all of the, that we were laughing. Mrs. Autry mentioned before about kind of the complexity of the PowerPoint, because once you start into this, it's hard. Thank God I have Mr. Harrington, who is, in terms of his reputation across the state and with all the state improvement, he has a stellar reputation of being one of the top leaders across the state on understanding all this and leading this and guiding this work, because it is difficult and complex work, but he's made it manageable for all of us to be able to keep track and understand.
Yeah, and it's helpful for me to see like real life examples in real time, so I can take a little bit of the complex stuff, and then if you showing an example, a specific district example, kind of helps reinforce, for me at least.
And maybe even in our next meeting, before we talk about the focus schools, we could just pick one or two priority schools and kind of show the types of strategies they're working on and what their data looks like. Mr. Harrington, maybe that would be better. And then we could go ahead and then introduce the focus group, and how you become a focus school and what they're required to do. Because the priority, Mrs. Autry, Mrs. Mansfield, and Ms. McKittrick, are there out of the schools that we were looking at. Which schools would you like to sort of take a deeper dive on? Do you want to pick one of the high schools, and then one of the either Innis or Helen Arnold, they're in because of lower performance? So do you want to pick one of them and take a deeper dive as well?
Yeah, sure.
Do you want Mr. Harrington just to choose who to take a look at, or do you want to put in a request?
Oh gosh, doesn't make any difference to me. I'm curious to learn whatever Mr. Harrington wants to teach.
Okay. Okay. Well, we can let Mr. Harrington pick, and then we can just keep, over time, we can keep looking at others as well. Because right now they'll also be sort of finishing out their school improvement plan, their 90-day plan also, where they go through a process of kind of closing out where did you end up with every single strategy that you committed to, that you said you were going to do, what were the results, close that out, and then over the summer then they work to build next year's. And Mrs. Autry, you've been more involved in actually kind of giving feedback on school improvement planning teams, so you understand the process of a school level team coming together to design their 90-day plan. All right. Well, Mr. Harrington, thank you for being here with us. We appreciate
No problem. Thank you for having me.
And just go ahead and block this meeting for the rest of your life on this calendar because I think we'll need you.
I will make it a priority. No pun intended.
There you go.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Have a
you so
wonderful
much.
evening.
Thank you
Thanks,
so
Mr.
much.
Harrington.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
That was pretty cute. I'll make it a priority. That was good. We also, he put together, and just so you could start to take a look at, in the board docs, there's the priority voucher list, school update that, oh no, maybe it's not in here yet. I'll be sure to send it to you. He also put together the information on the voucher schools and how you become eligible to have to offer vouchers for your families. And that'll be another topic that we can just do, kind of use in one meeting. We can just focus on that and make sure that you understand, because that's a whole nother separate criteria of how you are required to offer vouchers. And over the years, they've expanded that eligibility, chipped away little by little to expand the eligibility. But we can take a look at that as well. I know he put together a handout for that. I thought it was attached here, but not, but I'll send it out before we actually talk about it so you can review it before our next meeting. I do want to make sure if it's okay for us to move on to another topic. In the named partner section of the agenda, there is it's called the First Amendment to Sponsorship Agreement for Firestone. It's sort of an exciting time where we've now had the college and career academies long enough that we're at a place where we're starting to renew. And I believe this might be one of the first ones of coming back and kind of renewing their agreement for the future. So this is for Firestone to be able to amend their sponsorship agreement to continue. And what we'll do is have you just take a look at it here, make sure that it looks good, and approve it here. There's not changes in terms of their partnership agreement. It's all pretty much the same. It's not pretty much, but it's the same agreement, just moving forward with Bridgestone at East, partnering with the academy there. And as you know, running that whole collaborative auto shop as well, that's there. So that is there for us to review tonight, and then we'll bring it to the full board for approval, as long as you don't see any concerns with it. I asked specifically for Mrs. Tecca if there was any changes that we needed to alert us or be aware, or is this more just a process of renewing it? And she said it's a process to renew.
Can I just clarify something, Ellen? So
Sure.
when you were saying Firestone, you mean Bridgestone Firestone, and it's the agreement with East for the business that we run out of there with the students
Yeah.
for auto. Okay.
Yes, Bridgestone / Firestone is the company name. So I'll just say Bridgestone with East Community Learning Center.
Thank you. Just wanted to clarify.
Yes, thank you. That's an important clarification. And then Dr. James, do you want to take the second one?
I'll just open that one up. So, our goals are to have all of our academies have name integrated partners. We've been working on this one for quite some time. So we have a agreement that we'll be sending to board naming Acme Fresh Market as the latest academy. I think this one is Kenmore Garfield, I believe. Yes.
That's correct.
So that will be going to board. That's right in line next up for another named academy partner.
It's the Academy of Innovation and Industry at Kenmore Garfield.
Wonderful.
Yes, so it's very, very exciting. We've been trying to make sure our goal was to try to get every academy named before the superintendent, left at the end of June. So we were excited that this one came in time for him to be able to be a part of it. And there will be it's not going to be a big, large event just because of, where we are, but there will be a formal kind of press release type announcement with this. Okay. And then if there's not any other questions, the last thing that I just attached on here, this isn't something necessarily that will take time with the full board, but sometimes I like to just add some of these unique recognitions that are still really important for our students that were a part of a pitch challenge that our students actually placed in award ceremonies with this. And I have the names of the students in, if you're looking at the board docs agenda, it's Maya Kleckner, who's a 7th grader from East, took home 2nd place in the statewide 5th through 8th grade level. And what this was all about is that's the Ohio After School Network Pitch Challenge that empowers our youth by inviting them to learn or practice problem identification and solution mindset. So it's elevating student voice and having them select a problem and then solve it. And then they get to pitch how in this Young Entrepreneur Institute, they get to pitch how they're going to solve this problem. And it's run through our library system in the state of Ohio, but Akron, Ohio or the Akron Public Schools has participated with the support of our librarians. So we had Maya Kleckner from East took 2nd place, and Isabella Trejo, a 7th grader from East, took 3rd place. And I attached their pitches on here so you can actually see them and enjoy. And then Pa Ya Vang, another 7th grader from East, took home honorable mention. So we did very well in this statewide competition, which is pretty exciting. So you can take a look at that at your leisure and enjoy that. I typically, for something like that, I won't post that for the whole board, but I can share it out in an email or something like that if you'd like the whole board to see it. I just wanted to bring it to your attention. I should definitely send it to Mr. Bravo, since it's an entrepreneurship challenge is what it was involved in, since he's been the one really encouraging and pushing and successfully having us add that fourth E in entrepreneurship. So any questions about that? Is there anything else in terms of agenda items from all of you, or any questions or areas?
I have one quickie. I
Mhm.
do not have Teacher of the Year, anything virtual or otherwise, on my calendar. Is that happening this year? I remember seeing all the Teacher of the Year congratulations going out from all the buildings at one point, but it is not on my calendar that I see. Did I miss something?
It is
I know
happening.
it's Appreciation Week this week, so I'm appreciating, but I'm not. I'm not seeing. It's usually in
I
there
have
somewhere.
May 20th, 6 to 8:30.
Is that is not on the board calendar yet?
I
Maybe
think
we
this
missed-
just showed up on my calendar today, so I'll follow up with Ruth.
Okay.
Okay. I was looking for it and I was thinking that's the week it should be, but I wasn't seeing it. So I thought I'd ask.
Yeah, May
And are
5th.
we
I'm so
virtual?
glad that you did, because we will definitely make sure that that gets on your calendar through Ruth
Perfect.
Solomon.
And is that going to be a virtual event again this year, or is it going to be in person?
It is a virtual event this year.
Okay. Okay.
Yes, it is a virtual event. One more year of the virtual. The other thing I'll just mention is that, you know, we've been pushing out all the information about our 50+ summer programs, and we're getting, you know, lots of registrations coming in through the website. So please just keep, you know, sending that link out to our website. It's right now on, when you go to our main homepage, there's a tile right there for summer connected learning. And it also, when students open up their Chromebooks, it's the first page that opens up so that they automatically see all the, you know, the summer offerings. So we've tried to make it very accessible and easy, but, you know, principals are sending things out now. Mark Williamson and his communications team are sending things out, but continue to encourage. And we've had great, I mean, the names are coming in very quickly that families are registering. So we're excited about that.
Good. So is the enrollment at this point about what you expected it to be so far?
Yeah, I think so. Our main showcase camps are the ones that are, you know, that we're seeing lots of. I didn't look in today, but we're seeing, I was looking yesterday that we're seeing, you know, hundreds of families registering. So that's wonderful. So I feel good about, for us just, you know, starting that release in the middle of last week. I feel good about where we are, and we'll be able, you know, a lot of families are hitting the website but not necessarily clicking into register yet. So they're probably looking at options and trying to figure out what is the best schedule for their students. But I'll continue to, you know, let you know where we end up and the updates and things like that.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, Dr. James, anything else? Because it is 5:30.
No, I don't have anything to add. Thank you.
Okay. All right, thank you all for being here.
Good work on the partnership with Acme Fresh. Congratulations, rather. And also on renewing the partnership with Bridgestone. Great milestone there.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. All right, well, thank you very much.
Good stuff. Thanks, everyone.
Okay,
All right,
take
good
care.
night.
Good night.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Ryan.